Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now last Saturday we had the equinox, where just for one day you get exactly the same amount of night and day. 12 hours of dark, 12 hours of light. And I feel that it's like a seesaw. And now it just tips down towards midwinter. Now that's not great for some of us, but there are plants that don't seem to mind at all. For example, the cannas, this is Canna, Wyoming, and the Tithonias, and they will go on flowering until we get the first frost. If nothing else, we've got that to cheer us up. Of course, grasses are also looking fantastic at this time of year. And Carol is visiting a garden in Somerset with a superb display.
Rushing sound, lilting movement, animation. They set the whole place alive.
And I shall be potting up bulbs for Christmas. So right in the middle of the winter, we can have those flowers indoors. I'm also visiting a vegetable grower. Now he's a vegan and he's almost self-sufficient. So his veg really have to be good. Now, I often get asked the right way to prune roses. I know that there are people who feel that if they get it a bit wrong, they'll ruin the plant. It isn't true, you know. Roses are tough plants, and they can take an awful lot of hacking about and they'll come back. However, you do want to get the best from them. And if you prune shrub roses now, they'll look really good next year. It's dead easy. However, you do need a highly specialized piece of kit. That's a pair of shears. Now, you don't really think of shears being the ideal tool for pruning roses, but for shrub roses, they're perfect for the job. Now, I've got a shrub rose here. This is a Gallicat, but it's finished flowering. Now, if you're not certain whether you've got shrub roses or not, you can actually tell the difference between many of the shrub roses, the Gallicas, the Bourbons, the Albas, the Centifolias and so on, and hybrid teas. This is a hybrid tea. And you can see that it's got big flowers, they're still being produced, in fact those may well go on being produced right into November. And they're all made on the end of new growth. You've got all these buds at the end of the growth. So you wouldn't prune a hybrid tea that's still flowering. But a shrub rose tends to flower just once. The flowers are a little bit smaller, more petals, the petals are smaller and softer, the foliage is a bit smaller. It's less robust in many ways, but terribly tough as a shrub, and tends to have more stems. And some of them really go quite big. And that's another good reason for pruning in autumn, because if they're too big, the wind rocks them and the roots can be damaged. So if I just trim those off now, that really needs to be the only pruning that will happen. I can come back to it in spring if I want to, but they respond very well to being treated like a hedge. I'm mad. I'm not trying to reshape it or cut out old wood. I'm just trimming it back. And I would say about a quarter of this year's growth is all you need to take off. Next spring, if there are any dead stems or ones that are crossing badly, I can cut those out. But if there aren't, that's it. That won't get pruned again until next September or October. I think these grass borders are looking really good now. I only planted them last June, so it's only taken a year to get to this stage. And I tell you, I've done so little to look after them. They've done it on their own, and they've done it magnificently. The thing that I really love about grasses is the way that they add a textural and sensual element to the garden. So you peer through them, and you have the sound and the way that they rustle together. Really nothing else achieves that in quite the same way. And of course, now is their season.
Overlooking this idyllic scene is this giant sentinel, an aged oak. It keeps guard over this wonderful meadow, rich and diverse, full of the most wondrous grasses. It twinkles in the morning sun, and each dewdrop is transformed into a miniature rainbow. And what gives this meadow its wonderful lilting softness is this myriad of different grasses, each one of them so beautiful in itself, and together combine to create this glorious scene. Who could say just how many different species of grass make up this wonderful meadow? Each one totally different from the next. The things like this lovely crested dog's tail, very even and symmetrical, and then these lovely foxtail grasses. And this glorious meadow grass that makes these great, soft, wafty waves. Grasses in their natural habitat in meadows and fields look wonderful. But in our gardens too, they bring something extra. It's not just the lawns we walk about on. In their own right, they make the most beautiful and ornamental additions to our gardens. On a sloping site that used to be an old farmyard, Judy Pierce has planted her garden. Ornamental grasses used en masse mean that this is a space that's wonderful through every single season of the year. I think these grasses probably are at their very best at the moment. Aren't we lucky?
Are. Especially with the sun on them at this time. And of course they don't mind the very poor soil.
Did you improve this site at all when you got here?
Absolutely nothing. I mean, out in the wild, it's not improved at all.
Nope.
So I thought, let's bother. Let's plonk them in and hope for the best.
And it's obviously paid off, hasn't it?
Yes, I mean, these plants are very tough. They like it dry. They get it hot, hopefully, some summers.
Yeah.
And
certainly facing the right way.
It's facing the right way. I don't think it would work on a north-facing slope, for example.
No.
And I think they just thrive in the natural elements.
What gave you the inspiration for creating this, Judy?
Well, it was brought on by many visits driving across Spain. In the middle of Spain, on the plains, you come across rocks, wonderful grasses, and amazing flowers, all looking after themselves. Nobody's touching them. And I thought, this is what I want.
Right. But further down the slope, your grasses have sort of done their own thing, haven't they?
Oh yes, they've colonised well.
Yeah.
For example, the tenuissima will prefer it up here, and the little carex, the bronze carex,
it goes down the hill.
Has actually gone down the hill.
Yeah, and
where it's a bit
there.
damper. It's a plant in the right place. If it likes it, it'll thrive.
Exactly. It was the advent of prairie planting that brought grasses as a group of plants to the attention of us, the great British gardening public. But first of all, we were very wary about how to use them. But surely this is how you ought to use them, mixed together with wonderful perennials. If you're going for miscanthus, choose something like this. It's light, it's graceful, it's elegant. Despite its size, it's got great daintiness. On this slope, there are grasses small and grasses great. None of them bigger than this lovely Molinia. This is probably one called Wingame's Windspiel, and you can quite see why. It dances in the wind, it delights in it. Light's a vitally important factor too. Just consider how beautiful they are when you can see their silhouette against a bright blue sky. Now, if you wanted a short Molinia for your garden, any cultivar of Molinia caerulea would do brilliantly well. But if you want a bit of drama, go for one of these hybrids. This is Calamagrostis Karl Forster. Karl Forster was a German nurseryman and plantsman who cultivated and selected lots of really robust grasses. In common with miscanthus and Molinias, it'll grow practically anywhere, as long as it has enough moisture at its feet. Calamagrostis Karl Forster epitomises all the qualities that grasses can bring to your garden. Rushing sound, lilting movement, animation. They set the whole place alive. They remind me so much of the grasses that cover the earth in fields and meadows everywhere. And they bring that.
If ever you need flowers, it's in the depths of December. And if we plant bulbs now, we can pretty much guarantee having colour and fragrance at Christmas time. Now I've got 3 different types here. The first are hyacinths. Now this is one called Delft Blue, that lovely chinery blue, and a fragrance that few other plants can match. Now this is a prepared hyacinth. If you're going to buy them, make sure you ask for prepared bulbs. Otherwise, they'll take longer to flower. And it's quite important that you get on with this because they take about 12 weeks to flower. So actually, that takes us from today right through to Christmas. So this is something to do as soon as you can. I like using these bulb pans, sometimes called alpine pans. You do need to make sure the drainage is really good. So some crocks in the bottom, and then a compost mix that has got lots of grit added. I would say 50% grit. And by the way, I'm talking about horticultural grit, which you buy in bags. Now, normally with bulbs, you plant them deep, and I'm always saying plant them twice their depth. But in this case, you plant them very shallowly. In fact, we only want half the bulb below the surface. So what I'm going to do is just place those on the surface, and you can fit them about ½ an inch or so apart and ½ an inch away from the edge. And then I'll just lightly top that up so the shoulders of the bulb are sticking above the soil. And then grit on the top. Now what the grit does is both keep the compost still, so when you water it, it doesn't splash, and also protects the bulb if it gets too wet, because it will drain through the grit and keep it away. Now to make that flower by Christmas, it's got to go to a cool, dark place. And that means really dark. And then as you see the growth appearing and a little bit of colour emerging, bring them out into the light, into the warmth, and they'll grow and flower fast. So that's the hyacinths. Next, I've got paper white daffodils. Now this may look like any old daffodil bulb, but paper whites really are not like other daffodils because they carry with them all the sunshine of the Mediterranean, which is where they come from, and an incredible fragrance. So you're going to have the freshness of spring flowers right at the darkest time of year. This will flower 6 weeks from now, so it's a little bit early to have it flowering for Christmas. So if you do these by the end of October, they'll be fine. You can either put them in a pan or you can put them in a larger pot. And I've got a lovely old pot here, and that will balance the height because daffodils grow quite tall. So a little bit of drainage in the bottom. Remember the Mediterranean. They're like really good drainage again. And unlike normal daffodils, we don't have to worry about burying them deep, but we can just push them in, and rather than having their shoulders out the ground, these will be covered, but only just. Job done. You see, this is really easy. This is a really easy job. Finally, I've got an amaryllis. Now, amaryllis is a plant that is loud and proud. Has these fabulous trumpets of flower. No other plant, certainly in the middle of winter, gives such a volume of floral joy. But it likes its roots constricted, so you could easily grow this whopping great bulb in a pot about this size, with about 1 inch around the outside. If I put that in there, again, I will sit that so it is appearing out the top. I don't want to bury it. Now, the hyacinths need to go in cool dark and be brought out as they start to appear. Paper whites can go straight onto a windowsill, keep them moist, and they will grow and flower. And they'll just do their thing. Amaryllis needs some warmth. If this is going to flower around about Christmas time, it needs a blast of heat now. So a greenhouse, a conservatory, or an airing cupboard is good. It doesn't necessarily need light at this point, but it does need heat. And it starts to grow, then you can bring it into the light. So they've all got slightly different regimes, but with any luck and a little bit of care, they'll all be flowering by Christmas. Come on. Yes, wait, no, we're coming here. Try not to bump in the hedge, old chap. Now I've got more bulbs, but this time very much for sowing outside. These are Japanese onions. I'm going to put them in here next to the leeks. I've got a strip of ground. Now, Japanese onions you sow in autumn and you harvest them in early summer. And that makes them a month or two earlier than conventional onion sets, which you put in as soon as you can, the beginning of the year, and then harvest July, August time. It just fills the gap between the last of your stored onions and the first of your harvested ones. I'm going to add a little bit of compost because I find it just gives the soil a bit of a boost. This is not really fertilizer, it's much more getting all the organisms in the soil working to maximum effect. Now this is a variety called Electric Red, and we put them in the ground just like any other onion set, which is to bury them so that their tops are sticking out. And I use my finger, best planting tool there is, and just pop them in the ground so that you can just see a little bit of onion sticking out. And as with all vegetables, it is worth taking trouble to get them equally spaced because it makes hoeing so much easier. Now, like lots of people, I've been growing vegetables since I was a child, and over the years we get quite good at it. But from time to time you come across somebody who really is a cut above everybody else. Right, I was struck by how healthy and vigorous and big everything is. But then when you look closer, you see it's very precise. Everything is spaced exactly and accurately.
Perfect example is onions. The spacing of the onion determines almost totally, apart from the variety, how big it is. I want nice big onions to slice and do in stews and stocks, so I space them at a distance that is for that end product. I want nice big onions, I want nice big carrots, 3 inches between carrots.
Why do you want big onions, big carrots? Because the trend is towards
Yes.
baby veg.
With things like carrots, the nutritional value of carrots is not as great when they're young. As they mature and they darken in colour and get bigger, they take on more vitamin D or beta-carotene or whatever it is you're looking for. And so I would like to try to grow vegetables quickly, fast, so you get the sweetness, but also to get to a size that is more manageable.
To grow quickly, you've obviously got to have a soil that's
Yes.
got suitable nutrients.
Yes.
What's your approach to your soil?
That's most of my life. That's most of my work.
It's such a lovely phrase. I love someone to dedicate their lives to their soil is a wonderful thing. Richard's soil is heavy London clay, and he works hard to lighten its structure with large and regular additions of sand, compost, manure and leaf mould. Now this is excellent but conventional practice. However, I was intrigued by the way he makes his own potting compost, by recycling wood chip paths in his garden.
As soon as the seeds start growing in the paths, we know we've got to take them up and we sieve them. And you get 3 sieves. When you sieve it, first of all, you get the big lumps that we put back. Then we sieve it and we use the mid-sievings to put on the top to stop water loss and stuff on the pots. And the fine sievings, which is this, which is wonderful stuff, I think. And that is a big base for our own potting compost.
So do you make all your own potting compost?
I would say that we try to.
Right.
I have a lot of trimmings from the garden in general I would have to get rid of if I didn't compost them. And I know what's in it.
By keeping an eye on every detail of the way that his plants are growing, Richard is growing some fabulous veg on his plot. Looking at your tomatoes here, which I've been eyeing greedily, I have to say I am incredibly impressed. They look fantastic. But these are relatively small pots and they're only half full of soil.
Yes.
Why is that?
I think they like it like that.
with tomatoes, there is a kind of texture and sheen that you only get on really good tomatoes.
Part of that is due to what we feed them. They get fed every single day.
Every day?
Every single day with something.
How did you arrive at that decision to feed every day? I mean, did you start off feeding once a week?
This is what I think about in the bath at night. You know, I think about things like this.
Right.
Yes, I started off feeding them
Lots of baths.
once a week. I thought that wasn't good enough, so I started feeding them more often, and now we feed them every day.
So what are you feeding them on?
I feed them one of three things. We use comfrey liquid,
Yeah.
nettle liquid,
Yeah.
or wood ash liquid. And I look and I think these aren't green enough, so we give them some nettle, or the fruit is starting to ripen, so I want more wood ash, and I adjust it as we're going along.
Richard not only grows high quality, but also large quantities of vegetables. So he's more or less self-sufficient. And he preserves as much as possible by bottling, pickling and drying. This means that he has a larder packed with organic produce from the garden to see him through the winter months. But at this time of year, there's no shortage of fresh produce. All these tomatoes look really impressive, but this pair here are incredible. So you've got that lovely softness, which is all meat in there. If you press your thumb in there, it's ripe, it's full of juice, and yet it's firm. It's amazing. You know from the feel the taste will be fantastic. To be honest, those are the best tomatoes. These are the best tomatoes I have ever seen in the UK.
Very kind of you.
Whatever you're doing is very, very right. I think the really interesting thing about Richard and his approach to gardening is not that he's doing anything terribly unusual or even terribly different to most of us, but he's paying great attention to detail. And the real lesson, I think, is that vegetables in particular repay constant attention. A little bit often, rather than a lot seldom, is much more effective. It's been a mixed year for sweet peas. They were pretty late to get going because we had such a cold early summer, but they've kept flowering right into September. At this rate, they'll still be flowering in October. This year, I've done a trial to see whether it really makes a difference what time of year you sow your sweet peas. I took the same variety, Monty Don, and sowed some in pots in October, some more in pots in March, and then some directly in May. And I've kept account of all the flowers that have been picked. The results have been very interesting. Now, the end ones, which were sown last October, produced 1,320 flowers. This middle batch, sown in exactly the same way, but 5 months later, in March, produced 1,580 flowers, so appreciably more. And the ones that was direct sown on the same day as the others were planted out, which was early May, produced a grand total of 55 flowers. So hardly any at all. Now, to make it slightly more complicated, the autumn sown ones were way ahead until August. So as regards getting flowers for early summer, they definitely were an advantage. But from early August right through to the end of September, the spring-sown sweet peas produced many more flowers and easily caught up and have overtaken over the last 3 or 4 pickings. So I think that you've got to look after autumn-sown ones, you've got to protect them. The best course of action is sow your sweet peas in early spring, February, early March, grow them on nice and strong, look after them, and then plant them out in early May. And across the summer, that will give you most flowers for your buck. Now, I shan't be sowing sweet peas this autumn, but here are some jobs that you can be doing this weekend. Green manure is a very useful but rather underused way of improving soil structure and fertility and suppressing weeds. I'm using vetches or tares, but Hungarian grazing rye is also very good at this time of year. Just broadcast or sow the seed in drills, rake it over, and then it will grow over the winter, and next spring can be dug into the ground and a new crop sown or planted on top of it. Now this is only a small job, but actually it's one of the most important of the season, and that is to keep deadheading. It's not enough to do it just once a week. Try and do it every day if you can, even if it's only for a few minutes. Cut off the spent flower heads and new ones will form right up until the first frosts. By now, grass has had a pretty tough time of it and it needs a bit of TLC. The first thing to do is to scratch away with a wire rake all the dead thatch and loose growth so you can let light and air in. And then it needs aerating. If you've got a large area, you can hire a machine to do this, but if it's relatively small, a fork is the best tool to use. Simply dig it in as far as you can, riddle it about, and make holes all over the surface. This will let the air in, improve drainage, and dramatically improve the quality of the grass. Now, that's pretty much it for this week. But before I go, just to tell you that the British Trust for Ornithology are doing a survey to see which berries our birds like to eat. Now, it starts this Sunday, and if you in your garden want to be part of that, you can. And of course, gardeners should be, because it's really important that we encourage our birds in and perhaps plant the right food for them. And you can get all the details by going to our website. Now, I'll be back here next week, so I hope to see you then. Bye-bye.